Overflow meeting. We have a packed agenda, so I'd like to just go ahead and get started, please. And we will begin with Beth King. Would you like to introduce the project, please?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Beth King. I'm the Architectural Survey Coordinator. And our first presentation this morning, as you've already heard, is pre-recorded because our consultant, Po-Fu Yang, was scheduled to take some vacation time, which he very much deserves after all the hard work in Rocky Mount. So he kindly pre-recorded this for us with Matt, and thank you, Matt, last week. This is a project that took place between 2023 and 2025, and this is part of the CSXT line of road improvements that the North Carolina Department of Transportation undertook in Edgecombe, Nash, and Wilson counties. And so this survey, along with the upcoming rural survey of Nash County and the surveys of Edgecombe County and Wilson County, are all being funded as mitigation for that large DOT project, the building of the Central Carolina Intermodal Facility. So the Department of Transportation hired Richard Grubb and Associates, and Po-Fu was their principal on this project. I will say this was an update, a survey update, rather than an initial comprehensive survey. Rocky Mount received a really thorough comprehensive survey in 1980, which is quite a few years ago now. But do note that this project that you're about to see primarily focused on things that had been constructed after World War II up to the 1970s. You will see some things that are older than that, but because there was a thorough survey that went up through the beginning of World War II or so from the 1980s, this is updating. So you won't see quite as many old properties or older properties this time. And the list will not be quite as long as you might expect for a town the size of Rocky Mount because of the thorough prior survey and many National Register historic districts. But we were very pleased with this project. We thought there was a great outcome to this tremendous amount of work that RGA did. And so without further ado, I'll ask Matt to play that recording.
So from the spring of 2023 to the fall of 2025, Richard Grubb and Associates conducted an intensive level historic architectural survey of the city of Rocky Mount and its extraterritorial jurisdiction. The project was sponsored by the Federal Highways Administration and NCDOT as part of the mitigation of adverse effects to historic properties caused by the Carolina Connector Intermodal Terminal in Rocky Mount. RGA conducted the architectural survey in two phases. Phase one of the project consisted of the resurvey of previously surveyed properties in Rocky Mount and its ETJ. Phase two consisted of the survey of newly identified properties. Both phases were supervised by NCDOT Historic Architecture staff and NCHPO staff Beth King and Rebecca Spenbauer, as well as in consultation with the staff of the Rocky Mount Department of Planning and Zoning. The city of Rocky Mount is located in Nash and Edgecombe counties. The Atlantic Coastline Railroad, which is now part of CSX Transportation, serves as a county boundary between Nash and Edgecombe and bisects the city into roughly east and west halves. Phase one of the project was completed from the spring of 2023 to the fall of 2024. This phase consisted of the resurvey of approximately 1,496 previously surveyed properties and the update of approximately 1,017 survey files. Not all previously surveyed properties had an individual file. Some were recorded in block-based files, which contain records for multiple properties. So that's why the number of survey files is less than the number of previously surveyed properties. Previous major survey work undertaken in Rocky Mount include Kate Ono's intensive level Rocky Mount survey in 1979 and Richard Maxon's comprehensive Nash County survey from 1984 to 1985. The 1979 survey recorded over 500 buildings in Rocky Mount's central city area, which included commercial, industrial, residential, and community resources. Most of the buildings recorded in that survey date between 1890 and 1925. The 1984 to 1985 survey focused on structures built before World War II. Since 1979, 8 historic districts in Rocky Mount have been listed in the National Register. Approximately 1,053 previously surveyed properties, which I will abbreviate as PSPs, are located in National Register listed historic districts, while the remaining 443 PSPs are located outside of historic districts. Many of those located outside of historic districts are located in the fringes of downtown Rocky Mount, in surrounding neighborhoods, or in the rural areas within corporate limits. Shown here is a sample of the types of resources that we resurveyed. At the conclusion of phase 1 in 2024, we found that 1,176 PSPs were extant and 320 were demolished or moved. The National Register listed historic districts, except the Rocky Mount Central City Historic District, experienced few losses. The Rocky Mount Central City Historic District has 140 extant PSPs and 91 demolished or moved PSPs, which is the greatest loss among the historic districts in the city. Outside of the historic districts, approximately 207 have been demolished or moved. Prior to the beginning of the Phase 2 survey, RGA, DOT, and HPO agreed that the Phase 2 survey will focus on neighborhoods and significant individual buildings or sites. RGA developed a list of 20 target areas in the city that we recommended for survey work. We also developed a list of preliminary historic contexts that covered topics that were not sufficiently studied previously and could provide a fuller understanding of the city's development. The preliminary historic contexts helped guide RGA in selecting significant individual buildings or sites for survey. Phase 2 was conducted throughout 2025 and focused on the 20 target areas. Shown here is a sample of properties that we surveyed during Phase 2. RGA surveyed a total of 225 resources. Of the 225, 24 are neighborhoods and 201 are individual properties. The number of individually surveyed properties does not reflect the total number of resources located in the neighborhoods. As I had mentioned earlier, RGA, DOT, and HPO agreed that individual files will be made for highly significant properties within the target areas or properties that are associated with the historic contexts that RGA developed during this project. So not all properties within a target area were individually surveyed. Towards the conclusion of the survey work, RGA finalized a list of historic contexts for Rocky Mount with a focus on the period from 1945 to 1975. And those contexts are industry and commerce, residential and suburban development, public housing and urban renewal, community institutions, and civil rights, voting rights, and desegregation. I have 9 properties that I will present for the study list. I will present them by property type, beginning with neighborhoods, followed by religious properties, then dwellings, and lastly, a public works resource. 4 of the 9 resources that I'm presenting are neighborhoods. So before I get to those neighborhoods, I want to provide a very brief historic context for residential and suburban development in Rocky Mount. Rocky Mount's prosperous economy in the post-World War II period attracted workers and their families to the city. In 1950, Rocky Mount's population of 27,697 accounted for approximately 24.8% of the combined population of Edgecombe and Nash counties, which are collectively known as the Twin Counties. By 1970, the city's population grew to over 34,000, and its share of the Twin Counties population rose to approximately 30.8%. In North Carolina, the migration of people from rural to urban areas in the post-World War II period was the general trend. With a growing population in Rocky Mount came a burgeoning demand for housing. the city's housing development expanded outwards from the city center. Pre-World War II subdivisions experienced a resurgence in housing construction from the late 1940s through 1970s. Some of Rocky Mount's subdivisions that were platted prior to World War II were not built out until the 1950s to 1970s. New suburbs were platted near the city's fringes and outside of corporate limits. In Rocky Mount, a significant rise in auto ownership and a burgeoning demand for housing facilitated suburban growth away from the city center. You don't see it here, but there are post-World War II residential suburbs off-frame to the west and east in the 2024 aerial photograph. From the 1970s through the 1980s, Rocky Mount undertook a series of urban renewal projects in several of the city's neighborhoods, many of them being blue-collar and Black neighborhoods. Urban renewal strategies included demolishing and redeveloping entire areas, selective demolition, rehabilitation, and street improvements, among other urban renewal strategies. So that was a very brief historic context for residential and suburban development. I also touched on urban renewal, which is its own historic context. In the Rocky Mount Architectural Survey update report that RGA produced for this project, I discussed these historic contexts in further detail. So now I will present the study list candidates. Our first neighborhood is Edgemont Park. Edgemont Park is a residential neighborhood located roughly 0.7 miles southeast of Rocky Mount's commercial downtown and immediately southeast of the National Register listed Edgemont Historic District. Pineview Cemetery, a historically white cemetery, is located due north of Edgemont Park. The neighborhood occupies roughly 191 acres. Most properties are single-family residences, and churches are scattered throughout the neighborhood. Edgemont Park was originally platted in 1927 and 1930. It developed primarily between the 1920s and 1950s, beginning in the northwest and gradually expanding east and south. Development in Edgemont Park was gradual from the 1920s to 1940s. In local newspapers in the 1930s, developer A. Hicks invited prospective homeowners to, quote, join the many young business and professional men who have already built their homes in Edgemont Park, end quote. In 1940, houses lined along the 900 to 1100 blocks of Eastern Avenue and Sycamore Street, while the remainder of Edgemont Park remained vacant. Like other neighborhoods in Rocky Mount and across the country, Edgemont Park experienced a housing boom from the 1940s through the 1950s. By 1956, dwellings occupied nearly all lots in the neighborhood. Edgemont Park's distribution of architectural styles reflects the neighborhood's two phases of development. Interwar houses of mostly colonial revival and period revival style architecture are concentrated in the northwest section of the neighborhood. Minimal traditional and ranch style houses dominate the central and eastern sections of the neighborhood. Edgemont Park is also home to one of two Lustrum houses remaining in Rocky Mount. The Lustrum house is shown in the bottom right. One of the properties that I'm presenting later is a Lustrum house, but not this one. So I will discuss the history of Lustrum houses when I get to that property. From the 1930s through at least the early 1960s, Edgemont Park's residents were white and dominantly middle class. There are few comparable neighborhoods to Edgemont Park that tells the story of early 20th century subdivisions being primarily built out after World War II. Those neighborhoods include Inglewood in the western section of the city and Hargrove in the southern section. However, neither neighborhoods are truly comparable to Edgemont Park. Inglewood, which is one of the properties that I will present for the study list, was platted in 1925. It was one of the earliest, if not the first, subdivision in Rocky Mount to move away from the grid system. As you saw earlier from the plat map of Edgemont Park, the Edgemont Park neighborhood was platted in a grid. Inglewood also represents one of the earliest efforts to establish auto-dependent suburbs in the vicinity of Rocky Mount. For these reasons, Inglewood is not truly comparable to Edgemont Park, but does have similarities in its post-World War II construction boom. The second comparable neighborhood is Hargrove. It was originally platted in 1909, but remained largely vacant until the late 1940s when the subdivision experienced a housing boom. In contrast to Edgemont Park's collection of colonial revival and period revival architecture and its rhythmic streetscapes of minimal traditional and ranch-style houses, Hargrove is dominated by hip and gable front bungalows, vernacular dwellings that express modest elements of the Craftsman and Queen Anne styles, and several streetscapes of minimal traditional and ranch-style houses. Hargrove's architecture and streetscape are not as rhythmic as Edgemont Park's. In conclusion, Edgemont Park is one of the most intact neighborhoods that represents two phases of development that occurred in the interwar and post-World War II periods. So in conclusion, Edgemont Park illustrates Rocky Mount's post-World War II suburban expansion. The neighborhood was originally platted in 1927 and 1930 and gradually developed in its early years. Edgemont Park rapidly expanded to the east and south from the late 1940s through the 1950s, coinciding with the city's post-World War II housing boom. The neighborhood's geographic distribution of architectural styles illustrates its interwar and post-World War II development. Edgemont Park is potentially eligible under criterion A in the area of community planning and development. It may also be potentially eligible under criterion C in the area of architecture because of its rhythmic streetscapes dominated by minimal traditional, ranch, and period revival houses, many of which retain architectural integrity. Moving on to my next neighborhood, which is Crosstown. Crosstown is a primarily residential neighborhood located northeast of Rocky Mount's commercial downtown. It occupies roughly 294 acres and is situated on the Edgecombe County side of the city, east of the railroad. Most properties are single-family dwellings. Neighborhood stores are scattered throughout the area. Commercial properties are concentrated in the southeast and southwest sections of Crosstown. The southwest section overlaps with the Rocky Mount Central City Historic District, and it has experienced substantial loss due to demolition. The photo on the left are commercial properties in the southeast section. The photo on the right are those in the southwest section of Crosstown. Two historically Black schools are located in Crosstown. Pictured here is the Booker T. Washington High School, which was built in 1927. It served as a school for Black students until 1969, when Rocky Mount Public Schools were integrated. Since the 1970s, it has served as a community building. This school was study listed and determined eligible for National Register listing in 2009. This is the Oliver R. Pope Elementary School. It was built in 1938 and served as a school for Black students. It no longer functions as a school and appears to be vacant. The neighborhood is also home to approximately 11 churches. Shown here are some of the churches found in Crosstown. These are African American churches. It's worth noting that the Crosstown neighborhood has one of the largest concentration, if not the most concentration, of churches compared to other neighborhoods near the city center. Research has yet to determine where the name Crosstown derives from, but a 1923 Sanborn map of Rocky Mount labels this area as Crosstown. Crosstown was platted as a residential subdivision in 1892. It primarily developed from the 1900s through the 1950s. The earliest extant houses, dating to the 1900s to 1920s, are concentrated in the southern section of the neighborhood. From the 1920s to 1950s, residential development expanded north. By the early 1960s, over half of Rocky Mount's Black population lived in Crosstown and its vicinity. Many of Crosstown's dwellings from the 1900s to 1930s do not strongly express an architectural style, but some have modest elements of the Queen Anne, Craftsman, colonial revival, and period revival styles. Crosstown's residential architecture from the 1940s to 1950s includes the minimal traditional and ranch styles. Since its platting in 1892, the area has been home to blue and white-collar Black residents. Crosstown's blue-collar residents had diverse occupations, though many were employed in the tobacco industry. Many educators also lived in Crosstown. In 1930, for example, the 400 and 600 blocks of Atlantic Avenue, which are shown in red, were home to 3 principals and 16 teachers who taught at Booker T. Washington High School, Holly Street Public School, Lincoln School, and South Side School. A prominent educator who resided in Crosstown was Oliver R. Pope. Pope and his family lived at 606 Atlantic Avenue from 1923 to 1956. Pope served as the principal of Booker T. Washington High School and as the supervising principal of Black schools in Rocky Mount. The O.R. Pope Elementary School, which was built in 1938, was named in honor of him. Pope retired from the education profession in 1949. The Oliver and Myrtle Pope House, which is shown here, warrants further documentation. However, I'm not recommending it for the study list at this time due to limited information about the interior of the house. I had no success in contacting the property owner, and according to a neighbor, the house is vacant. Religious life played a prominent part in the community of Crosstown. Approximately 9 churches in the neighborhood were established from the late 19th century through the 1970s. The oldest of these is believed to be St. James Missionary Baptist Church, which was organized in June 1885. It was founded as a Black church and continues to serve Rocky Mount's Black community. The present-day sanctuary was constructed in 1913 and was the 3rd sanctuary built at this site. The original sanctuary is gone. In the 1950s, an education wing was built to the side of the sanctuary. The Immaculate Conception Catholic Mission was founded in 1942 as a Catholic mission for Rocky Mount's Black community. It was the first and only Black Catholic church in Rocky Mount. This is one of my study list properties that I will present later, so you will see this again. In 1974, the city's planning department identified Crosstown as one of the 7 areas in Rocky Mount that were blighted. In the 1970s and 1980s, the city provided grants and loans for rehabilitation projects in Crosstown and other areas in the city. In 1980, the city used $434,000 in HUD grants for rehabilitation projects in Crosstown. The neighborhood was also the subject of selective demolition. Several blocks throughout the neighborhood have many vacant lots due to demolition as a result of urban renewal and its consequences in the 3rd quarter of the 20th century into the 21st century. Shown here are the streets that have a large concentration of vacant lots that interrupt the rhythmic streetscape. Vacant lots are scattered elsewhere throughout the neighborhood. These 2 photos show what I mean when I say that there are several streets with large numbers of vacant lots. Other comparable Black neighborhoods include Happy Hill in the western section of the city and Little Raleigh in the southeast section. Both Happy Hill and Little Raleigh were predominantly blue collar. Their residential architecture is also similar to Crosstown, with vernacular dwellings that have modest expressions of the Queen Anne and Craftsman styles. Happy Hill and Little Raleigh were also subject to urban renewal and rehabilitation projects from the 1960s through the 1980s. Unlike Crosstown, Happy Hill and Little Raleigh have less concentrations of community institutions. Crosstown's collection of properties best represent Rocky Mount's Black life during the 20th century. This should not be misinterpreted to mean that Happy Hill and Little Raleigh are not potentially eligible for National Register of Listing. It's just that for this project, we chose Crosstown as the best representative to present for the study list at this time. In conclusion, Crosstown is a historically Black neighborhood that dates to around the turn of the 20th century. In terms of population, it was one of the largest, if not the largest, Black neighborhoods in Rocky Mount. Crosstown represents self-sufficient Black neighborhoods in Rocky Mount during Jim Crow segregation. Its diverse property types, including dwellings, commercial buildings, and community institutions, illustrate that history. Buildings throughout the neighborhood have varying degrees of architectural integrity, which are typical of neighborhoods found throughout the city. Since the 1970s, several blocks throughout the neighborhood have experienced substantial loss of buildings due to demolition, while vacant lots can be found scattered throughout the neighborhood. Those changes to the landscape are intricately tied to the city's history of urban renewal and rehabilitation projects in the third quarter of the 20th century, as well as its consequences in the 21st century. RGA recommends Crosstown for placement on the study list. It is potentially eligible under criterion A in the areas of community planning and development and ethnic heritage Black. Moving on to my next neighborhood, Inglewood. Inglewood is a residential suburb located west of the Tar River and west of South Wesleyan Boulevard. It is roughly 2 miles west of Rocky Mount's commercial downtown. It occupies roughly 226 acres and is roughly bounded by Sunset Avenue to the north, Forest Hill Avenue to the east, Winstead Road to the south, and Inglewood Drive to the west. Inglewood is predominantly residential with one public elementary school and 2 churches. Commercial buildings are located along Sunset Avenue at the north boundary of the neighborhood. Inglewood's residential architecture is diverse and includes the Colonial Revival, Craftsman, Tudor Revival, Period Revival, Ranch, and minimal traditional styles. According to research conducted by Richard Matson, Inglewood was Rocky Mount's first subdivision west of the Tar River. The platting of Inglewood in 1925 reflects the rise of automobile-dependent suburbs in the early 20th century. Inglewood is one of Rocky Mount's earliest, if not the first, subdivision to move away from the grid system. Zebulon Bullock, who platted Inglewood in 1925, Bullock and business partner W.S. Wilkinson Jr. sold the properties in Inglewood to prospective homeowners. The earliest deeds for the subdivision contained covenants that prohibited people of color, except domestic servants and their families, from occupying or buying properties in Inglewood. The covenants also restricted the minimum cost of a dwelling, the minimum building setback, and outbuilding construction, among other constraints. Development in Inglewood was slow during the interwar period. An aerial photograph taken in 1940 shows Inglewood and its interior streets largely vacant of buildings. Inglewood's earliest houses, built in the 1940s and earlier, are concentrated in the northeast section. Inglewood was originally located outside of Rocky Mount's corporate limits. Rocky Mount annexed the area in 1955. Houses built prior to 1940 include Colonial Revival, Craftsman, Bungalow, Period Revival, and Tudor Revival dwellings. The house on the top left is Zebulon Bullock's house. It was study listed in 1986 and determined eligible for listing in 1996. Following World War II, Inglewood experienced a housing boom. Most dwellings in Inglewood were constructed sometime between 1940 and 1969. Many of Inglewood's minimal traditional houses were built in the 1940s. Most of the houses built in the 1950s are located in the eastern and central sections, while dwellings built in the 1960s are concentrated in the southwest section. With few exceptions, houses built in the 1950s and 1960s are ranches. So there aren't really any other comparable neighborhoods to Inglewood in terms of the overall design of the neighborhood and its development. The closest is the National Register listed West Haven Historic District. It was platted in 1928 and also moved away from the grid system. In contrast to Inglewood, West Haven was built out by 1952. Colonial Revival style houses prevail in West Haven. In conclusion, Inglewood was Rocky Mount's first subdivision west of the Tar River. Inglewood was not fully built out until after World War II, with most dwellings dating from the 1940s to 1960s. Inglewood reflects early attempts to establish automobile-dependent suburbs outside of what was then Rocky Mount city limits, and it was one of the earliest, if not the first, Rocky Mount subdivision to move away from the grid system. It is potentially eligible for listing under criterion A in the area of community planning and development and criterion C in the area of architecture. My fourth and final neighborhood is West Ridge. West Ridge is a residential suburb located due west of Inglewood and roughly 3 miles west of Rocky Mount's commercial downtown. It was first platted in 1955 and occupies roughly 176 acres. Prior to the platting of West Ridge in 1955, the land that West Ridge now occupies consists of agricultural fields and woodland that were part of the Winstead Farm. In 1954, business partners and developers Spears and Heck began acquiring land to the west of Inglewood to establish and develop a new residential suburb for middle-class families. Spears and Heck platted the suburb in 11 stages from 1955 to 1970. At the time of its platting in 1955, West Ridge was considered distant from other residential areas in Rocky Mount. Other than Inglewood, no other suburbs were under development west of the Tar River in the Rocky Mount vicinity. Nonetheless, West Ridge proved attractive to prospective homeowners. Speculative building began as early as 1954 or 1955 along Winstead Road. A 1955 newspaper advertisement describes a ranch house as a modern, well-constructed home with plenty of yard space along the recently paved Winstead Road. In 1967, 160 families, all homeowners, lived in the area. At the time, 14 new houses were under construction and more than 100 lots remained to be developed. Housing construction in West Ridge tapered off in the 1970s. With few exceptions, dwellings date from the mid-1950s through the 1970s. Housing construction in West Ridge expanded from east to west, then south to north. The greatest concentration of mid and late 1950s houses are located in the southeast section of the neighborhood. West Ridge's residential architecture includes ranch, colonial revival, and mid-century modernist style houses. Shown here is a sample of houses found in West Ridge. Development included both custom and speculative homes. Architect John Lee Thompson served as the primary architect, designing some of the houses in the neighborhood. Now, just to clarify, not all of the houses shown here were designed by Thompson. This is just a sample of the houses in the neighborhood. The earliest deeds for the subdivision contained covenants that required all lots to be residential. Other constraints included the minimum cost of a dwelling, the maximum house height, minimum ground floor area, minimum building setback, and outbuildings, among other constraints. Limited city director research suggests that residents included middle and professional class families. Of the neighborhoods in Rocky Mount that we surveyed, West Ridge is the only neighborhood that has a large concentration of modernist style ranch houses. Other neighborhoods with post-World War II development, such as Inglewood and Edgemont Park, have ranch houses, but not as many that incorporate modernist architecture. In conclusion, West Ridge is believed to be the second Rocky Mount suburb established west of the Tar River. It represents Rocky Mount's post-World War II suburban growth, and it has a collection of colonial revival, ranch, and modernist-style houses that retain architectural integrity. West Ridge is potentially eligible under criterion A in the area of community planning and development and criterion C for architecture. Now moving on to our first individual property, which is the Immaculate Conception Catholic Mission. It is located in the eastern section of the city in Edgecombe County. The church is located on East Virginia Street within the Cross Street neighborhood. Here is an aerial view of the property. Immaculate Conception Catholic Mission was founded and built in 1942. It is a frame, one-story, temple-form church that features elements of classical revival and Romanesque revival style architecture. The north-facing church has a T-shaped footprint comprised of a front gabled sanctuary flanked by a pair of side gabled rear annexes. The sanctuary features a gabled Petro-style portico on the front elevation. As you can see, windows include round arched wood-framed windows with multicolored glass panes piercing the sanctuary side elevations and rectangular double-hung vinyl sash windows. The church was founded in 1942 as a Catholic mission of St. Alphonsus Church in Wilson, which had been established the previous year. Prior to 1942, there were no Black churches in Rocky Mount. The mission was established for Rocky Mount's Black community. It was the first Black Catholic church in the city of Rocky Mount. Architect James A. McGiddy of Wilson designed the church building, and the Redemptorist Fathers of the Baltimore province were the builders. The church opened for service in August 1942. Immaculate Conception Catholic Mission remains active today. This is a 1974 photograph of the church. As you can see, the steeple is gone. I do not have an exact date for when the steeple was removed, but based on aerial photographs, the steeple might have been removed in the 1980s or 1990s. I attempted to contact their pastor and Our Lady of Perpetual Help, which is a Catholic church in Rocky Mount, but did not receive a response. Now, it's worth noting that the loss or alteration of steeples was not uncommon for churches in Rocky Mount. Here is a photograph of the altar and apse. Immaculate Conception is associated with a larger Catholic movement in the early and mid 20th century to evangelize African Americans and to desegregate Catholic institutions within the Diocese of Raleigh. In the early 20th century, the Diocese of Raleigh had built separate churches and schools for Blacks as part of its missionary outreach to African Americans. White Catholic churches were not officially segregated. However, Blacks could not be members of white Catholic parishes. The few Blacks who attended white Catholic churches were sometimes segregated from white parishioners and given Holy Communion after whites. In 1946, under the leadership of Bishop Vincent Waters, the diocese began gradually desegregating Catholic and diocesan societies. On June 12, 1953, Bishop Waters of the Raleigh Diocese ordered the end of racial segregation in all Catholic churches, schools, and institutions in the Diocese of Raleigh. Bishop Waters noted that until the 1940s, there were no special Catholic churches for Blacks in North Carolina. The Diocese of Raleigh had established special churches and schools in recent years as part of an effort to promote missionary work among Black people. Bishop Waters warned that if churches failed to carry out the doctrine of non-segregation, all special churches for Black people would be abolished. After Bishop Waters' order was announced, Father Charles McLaughlin, who is the pastor of Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Rocky Mount, informed locals that the policy of non-segregation had always been practiced in local Catholic churches. Father McLaughlin assured the public that the bishop's order would not abolish the Immaculate Conception mission. He also speculated that predominantly Black churches would not be abolished, but would continue to exist because of their convenient location for Black members. At the time of Bishop Waters' order, not all Rocky Mount Catholics supported integrating Catholic churches and schools. In 1955, Our Lady of Perpetual Help School, a Catholic parochial school, allowed 2 African-American Catholic students to enroll at the school. One parent told local newspapers that she knew of 15 or 20 other parents who were taking their children out of the school. Father McLaughlin issued a statement in support of the admittance of the two African-American Catholic students, arguing that there were no other choice but to take in the two students, since there were no other Catholic parochial schools in Rocky Mount. The immediate impact that Bishop Waters' desegregation order had on the Immaculate Conception Catholic Mission is not known. In 2002, Father Javon Saxon, who ministered to both Immaculate Conception and Our Lady of Perpetual Help, observed that many African-American missions in the Diocese of Raleigh were absorbed by larger churches as a result of desegregation. According to Father Saxon, Immaculate Conception was unique because it was, quote, the last African-American mission still existing on its own in the whole Raleigh diocese, end quote. Now, this should not be misinterpreted to mean that it is the only Black church in the Raleigh diocese. There is a difference between a parish and a mission. A parish is a stable community of Christian faithfuls under the care of a pastor or parish priest. A mission is a community that does not have sufficient resources to support a stable parish, but instead generally focus on evangelization. Within the Raleigh Diocese, there are a number of predominantly Black churches and parishes. But we believe that the Immaculate Conception is the only remaining predominantly Black mission dating to the mid-20th century that illustrates the history of African-American evangelization and desegregation within the Diocese of Raleigh. In conclusion, Immaculate Conception represents efforts by the Raleigh Diocese and local Black communities to establish Black Catholic missions in the second and third quarters of the 20th century. This was during a time in which the Raleigh Diocese promoted missionary work in Black communities and wrestled with the issue of racial segregation. Today, Immaculate Conception is now under the care of Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Rocky Mount and is a predominantly Black Catholic mission that dates to the mid-20th century. It is the first and only Black Catholic church in Rocky Mount. RGA recommends Immaculate Conception Catholic Mission for placement on this federal list. It is potentially eligible under criterion A in the areas of ethnic heritage Black and religion. It also meets criteria consideration A for religious properties. According to criteria consideration A religious property requires justification on architectural, artistic, or historic grounds. Historic significance for a religious property cannot be established on the merits of a religious doctrine, but rather for architectural or artistic values or important historic or cultural forces the property represents. So one of the reasons a religious property can be eligible is if it is directly associated with either a specific event or a broad pattern in the history of religion. Immaculate Conception is directly associated with a broad pattern in the history of the Catholic Church, and specifically the Diocese of Raleigh, where the Catholic Church sought to promote missionary work in Black communities in the early and mid-20th century, and but also had to address the issue of racial segregation. We are not claiming criterion C because the property's significance is its association with a broad pattern in the history of religion, rather than for its architecture. We do not believe that the loss of the steeple precludes it from being potentially eligible under criterion A for its association with the history of African-American evangelization and desegregation in the Diocese of Raleigh. Moving on to our next property, Temple Beth El. It is located on Sunset Avenue in the western section of the city on the Nash County side. Here is an aerial view of the property. Built in two stages in 1949 and 1951, Temple Beth El is a one-story brick veneered synagogue located on an elevated lot at the northeast corner of Sunset Avenue and North Pine Street. The sanctuary was built first in 1949 and is located at the front. The education wing was built in 1951 and is located behind the sanctuary. The sanctuary is a muted post-World War II interpretation of the Romanesque style as seen in the grouped round arched windows. It also displays elements of the Gothic Revival style in the front gabled parapets capping the front vestibules. The education wing has elements of the mid-century modernist style. Architect Harry Harrows designed Temple Beth El, and contracting firm DJ Rose and Son served as the contractor. Harrows was a prominent Rocky Mount architect who designed primarily residential and educational buildings in Rocky Mount and eastern North Carolina. DJ Rose and Son was a locally prominent contracting firm. According to a proposed rendering of the temple, the windows were initially designed to be rectangular sash windows like those found on the education wing. Research has not yet determined whether the round-arched windows are replacements or part of a design change during the planning and construction phase. The photo on the top right was taken at an unknown date, but that photo is grouped with digital photographs that date to the late 1950s. So that photograph on the top right might date from the late 1950s or the early 1960s. Here is a close-up view of the windows on the facade. Nash and Edgecombe counties saw a surge of Jewish families moving into the Twin Counties in the late 19th century. Prior to the construction of Temple Beth El, Rocky Mount's 26 Jewish families used a room in the Masonic Temple at 122 North Church Street for a place of worship. At the time of its completion, Temple Beth El was the first synagogue built in Rocky Mount. Jacob Abraham Rosenblum was the founder of Temple Beth El. Rosenblum was a Lithuanian immigrant who immigrated to the United States in 1901. He was a prominent Rocky Mount citizen as the owner of the Rosenblum Levi department store and was a charter member of the Rocky Mount Kiwanis Club. It had a Hebrew school edition added in 1951. Temple Beth El served as a place of worship, community and cultural assembly, and education for Rocky Mount's Jewish community. RGA had no success contacting the owner and therefore did not access the interior. Photographs of the inside are available online. The following interior photographs were taken in 2022. This is the inside of the sanctuary. This is inside the education wing. In conclusion, Temple Beth El served as a place of worship, cultural assembly, and education for Rocky Mount's Jewish community. Temple Beth El illustrates the cultural diversity of the city of Rocky Mount and Nash and Edgecombe counties. The temple also reflects the history of immigration and entrepreneurship as illustrated by one of its founding members, Jacob Abraham Rosenblum. RGA recommends Temple Beth El for placement on the study list. It appears to be potentially eligible for listing under criterion A in the areas of ethnic heritage and religion. Temple Beth El also meets criteria consideration A for religious properties. Criteria consideration A states that, quote, a religious property can be eligible if it is directly associated with either a specific event or a broad pattern that is significant in another historic context. A religious property would also qualify if it were significant for dissociations that illustrate the importance of a particular religious group in the social, cultural, economic, or political history of the area, end quote. Temple Beth El meets that requirement because it also reflects the history of immigration and entrepreneurship in Rocky Mount and illustrates the cultural diversity of the city. Moving on to the next property, the Henry and Lucille Proctor House. It is located on Sunset Avenue in the western section of the city on the Nash County side. Here is an aerial view of the property. Constructed around 1949, the dwelling is a one-story, side-gabled, prefabricated enameled steel Lushman house. It is an example of a two-bedroom Westchester deluxe model. The north-facing steel-framed house has a rectangular footprint with an inset corner porch at the northeast corner. The exterior walls are made of 2 by 2 feet porcelain-enabled steel panels, which have a desert tan color. Porcelain-enabled shingles cover the roof. An interior chimney pierces the south roof slope. Interior photographs are available on Zillow, but the dates of the photos are unknown. According to the photographs, the floor plan looks intact. Interior finishes include carpet and tile floors and porcelain-enabled steel panel walls and ceiling. The built-in vanity in the master bedroom, pictured left, and the built-in cabinet in the kitchen, pictured in the middle, appeared to be intact. The bathroom, which is pictured right, also appears to be intact. The Henry and Lucille Proctor House is believed to be one of 2 extant luxury houses in Rocky Mount. The other is located in the eastern section of the city on the Edgecombe County side. It is pictured in the top right. Lustrum houses were prefabricated enameled steel houses manufactured by the Lustrum Corporation between 1946 and 1950. Lustrum offered 4 models, which varied in size, amenities, and had both 2 and 3 bedroom versions. The 2-bedroom Westchester Deluxe, which the Proctor House is an example of, was the most popular model. There were 4 color options for the exterior panels: surf blue, maize yellow, dove gray, and desert tan. The Proctor House has a desert tan exterior. The Lustrum Corporation produced less than 3,000 homes before it ceased production in 1950. An estimated 1,500 Lustrum houses survive. On the right are photographs of the Clifford M. Crone Lustrum House in Arlington, Virginia. As you can see, the interior finishes are similar to the Proctor House in Rocky Mount. RGA recommends the Henry and Lucille Proctor House for placement on the study list. It appears to be potentially eligible for listing under criterion C for architecture as a typical and rare example of a Lustrum house with an accompanying garage. The Proctor House is a more intact version of a Lustrum house than the other house located in the western section of the city. In the eastern section. The Proctor House also has a rare Lustrum garage, which the other house doesn't. My next property is the Jackson and Sarah Langley house. It is located roughly 4.5 miles southwest from downtown Rocky Mount. Here is an aerial view of the property. It's located to the west of a crossroads known as Eisenberg Crossroads. The reason why I'm recommending this for the study list is because of its association with Jack Kerouac, an a white American novelist and poet. Kerouac lived on and off at this house in the early 1950s, so we are claiming criterion A for this property. The house was built in 1946 and moved to its current location around 1950. It was formerly sited in the northeast quadrant of Eisenberg Crossroads before being moved to its current location around 1950. A gas station occupies the house's original site. The original site was here, and it was moved here. The south-facing house measures 3 bays wide and 4 bays deep. Asbestos shingles clad the exterior. It has an off-center gable roof porch on its primary elevation. Windows throughout the house are 6/6 vinyl sash replacements. Although not confirmed, the historic window configuration may have been 6/6, since its twin house, located near Eisenberg Crossroads, which is pictured in the top right, looks nearly identical and has 6/6 windows as well. Here's a photo of the west side elevation and rear. As you can see in the corner, that used to be an inset porch, which was enclosed at an unknown date. There have been recent changes to the interior. According to the owner, changes were made in the bathroom. which include new tiled shower, vanity, toilet, and flooring. In the kitchen with new flooring, new cabinets, lighting, and appliances, and a half bath that was added inside the enclosed back porch. According to the owner, the hardwood floors, interior doors, and closets in the living room, dining room, and bedrooms are all original. Here is the living room in the front section of the house. This is one of the bedrooms. This is a second bedroom in the house. This is a full bathroom located between the two bedrooms. This is the dining room. The recently renovated kitchen. And the recently renovated enclosed back porch, which contains a half bath. This house was built by local builder Octavius Joyner for Jackson and Sarah Langley. Following the death of Jackson's father in 1948, Jackson and Sarah moved into his father's house. Around 1950, Jackson and Sarah had this subject house moved to its present-day location next to their new home. The couple rented out the subject house. One notable person who stayed at this house was Jack Kerouac, an American novelist and poet. Kerouac was one of the pioneers of the Beat generation, a post-World War II literary and cultural movement that explored themes regarding American culture and politics. Topics of the Beat movement included nonconformity, anti-materialism, spiritual exploration, Eastern religion, hallucinogenic drugs, and sexual liberation. Members of the Beat generation were known as beatniks, and they directly influenced the counterculture and hippie movement of the 1960s. Kerouac's sister, Caroline, and her husband, Paul Blake, rented the home from the Langleys in the early and mid-1950s. Caroline and Paul appear in the 1955 Rocky Mountain City Directory. Kerouac lived on and off with his sister and brother-in-law during that time. During Kerouac's stay, he was studying and practicing Buddhism, which influenced some of his literary work. According to Edinburgh locals, Kerouac used his sister's home as a writing studio and the neighboring woods and farms as a place to reflect and meditate. While in North Carolina, Kerouac experimented with his new unconventional writing style, which he called spontaneous prose. A couple features of his writing style included the use of unconventional punctuation and the use of stream of consciousness narrative. Kerouac's spontaneous prose influenced other poets and novelists as well. At the request of his friends Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs, Kerouac wrote Essentials of Spontaneous Prose in 1953 that outlines the style's technique. It is unknown where Kerouac was living when he wrote Essentials of Spontaneous Prose, but it was during the time when he lived on and off with his sister and brother-in-law in Rocky Mount. Allen Ginsberg, an American poet, wrote his best-known poem, Howl, in Kerouac's spontaneous prose. It is believed that Kerouac wrote his treatise on Buddhism, titled Some of the Dharma, during his stay in Rocky Mount. He makes references to Rocky Mount and Edinburgh in the text. According to a synopsis of the book, Kerouac wrote Some of the Dharma during a critical period of his life and is a key volume in Jack Kerouac's vast autobiographies. The timeline of the book, which was written around the time when Essentials of Spontaneous Prose was published, and the book's visually complex and unconventionally punctuated entries strongly suggest that Some of the Dharma is an example of his spontaneous prose. Caroline and Paul Blake moved to Florida in the mid-1950s. In 1957, Kerouac moved to Orlando, Florida, where he wrote his best-selling book, On the Road, in the spontaneous prose style. The house that he lived in Orlando, Florida, where he wrote on the road is listed in the National Register of Historic Places for its national significance under Criterion D for its association with Jack Kerouac. Although Kerouac's Sum of the Dharma is not as acclaimed as his best-selling novel On the Road, it is an example of Kerouac's spontaneous prose that is a key feature of his literary work. Moreover, if a definitive connection can be made between Kerouac's essentials of spontaneous prose and his time in Rocky Mount, it may reinforce the historic significance of the subject house as being one of the known places where he developed and outlined the technique of his spontaneous prose style. So RGA recommends the Jackson and Sarah Langley House for placement on the study list. It is potentially eligible under Criterion B for its association with Jack Kerouac, particularly during the time when he was studying and practicing Buddhism, which was a significant period of his life and career, and during the time when he developed his spontaneous prose writing style. Now, moving on to my last property, the Paul Street water tank. Here is an aerial view of the site. The Paul Street water tank is a steel 1 million gallon Toro ellipsoidal water tower built around 1955. It possesses the typical features of Toro ellipsoidal water towers, which include column shoes, tank support columns, riser pipe, tie rods, support struts, ladder platform, balcony with handrail and tank valve, and a communication conduit, which are not pictured here. Two unique features of this water tower are its tank stairs that spiral up the riser pipe and its curved balcony stairs that lead up from the ladder platform to the balcony. The elevated water tank is supported by 12 legs. At an unknown date, the lower section of the riser pipe stairs was removed due to people climbing up the water tank without permission. Routine maintenance includes cleaning the inside of the tank every 4 years and painting the exterior every 10 years. A small frame building situated to the south of the water tank houses equipment and radio that reads the water pressure of the tank and transmits that information to the water treatment plants. A concrete structure houses an altitude valve that detects the water pressure of the tank and distribution pipe. The Paul Street water tank water line is connected to the Sunset Avenue water treatment plant and to the Tar River Reservoir water treatment plant. In late 1954, the City of Rocky Mount's Board of Aldermen awarded a contract to Chicago Bridge and Iron Company for the construction of a new 1 million gallon water tower. The company was a leading innovator in water tower design in the United States through the mid-20th century. In 1958, the company filed a patent for a Toro-type tank, which was issued a patent in 1960. This suggests that the Paul Street water tank is an early example of Toro-type tanks designed by the Chicago Bridge and Iron Company. In 2012, the South Dakota HPO published historic context for steel water towers associated with South Dakota water systems. Some of the information presented in that report is also applicable to other states. The following information is drawn from that report. Toro-type tanks are elevated water tanks that have a torus bottom, which means a conical shaped transition in the bottom. Toro-type tanks include Toro spherical and Toro ellipsoidal tanks, a principal difference being the overall shape of the tank. Oval-shaped water tower designs started to appear in the mid-1930s, but true Toro spherical and Toro ellipsoidal tanks were not perfected until the late 1950s. Toro ellipsoidal tanks typically have capacities of 250,000 to 500,000 gallons, but can be 1 million gallons or more. Toro-type tanks became popular in the post-World War II period. Besides the Paul Street water tank, Rocky Mount has another Toro ellipsoidal tank in the eastern section of the city on the Edgecombe County side of town. It is located on Marigold Street and is believed to have been built around the same time as the Posh Street tank. One defining feature of the Marigold Street water tank is its cupola-like structures mounted on the tank. The history of the Marigold Street water tank is not immediately clear. A 1955 newspaper article discusses raising a 1 million-gallon tank on Marigold Street, which may be the present tank. The legs on the Marigold Street water tank are noticeably different from the Posh Street water tank, which indicates that the Posh Street water tank is a more intact example of the Toro ellipsoidal tanks in Rocky Mount. So RGA recommends the Posh Street water tank for placement on the study list. It is potentially eligible under criterion C in the area of engineering as an early and representative example of a Toro ellipsoidal tank. So that concludes my presentation. RGA recommends 9 resources for the study list. Thank you, and that's it.
All right. They're difficult to ask questions of POFU, obviously, but are there questions or comments or discussion about any of the 9 properties that POFU presented?
I want to clarify with the Proctor house. No, I'm sorry, the Langley house. Now he was there in the 50s, but it was moved after 1960. About the Jack Kerouac. The house.
It was my understanding that the house was moved prior to Kerouac's sister and brother living in the house and his being in residence in the house. Yes.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions?
I do have a question.
Sure.
It was mentioned that a comparable for the Inglewood neighborhood is the West Haven neighborhood. Does that mean that the West Haven neighborhood was not specifically surveyed because it's not being impacted by this federal action?
Let me quickly look at HPO Web, but I believe that West Haven is already a National Register Historic District. And I believe that that's the reason that it was not surveyed at this time. But let me quickly confirm that.
Sure. What I'm getting to and specifically is a house that I don't think that's in that neighborhood, but is in not National Register District, but is a real important house that has not been clearly recognized for what it is, which is a George Matsumoto design. That's the Hicks house. And it's been recently restored back to that earlier appearance. And it really is spectacular. And
yes, we had really hoped to have that house for the study list. And it was surveyed during this project. There were 3 high-style modernist houses that were identified in Rocky Mount, and that was one of them. And perhaps, I think very arguably the best of them. But unfortunately, we were not given permission to access the interiors of any of those modernist houses. So we have a good survey file, we have exteriors, we have a note in our database that these seem to be very important properties. And if the property owner came forward in the future with a study list application, we have this flagged as something that we saw great potential in during the survey. But unfortunately, we were not able to propose it for the study list at this time.
If ever y'all would like to take a tour of the house and see the interior, I can arrange that. Took Catherine Beischer there recently.
Thank you. Let me close the loop with, I know Christy Brantley was involved in trying to get access to that house. Let me close the loop with the Raleigh coworkers and remind myself what actually happened there. And we very well may be in touch to try to follow up on that further.
That would be terrific. It really is a wonderful house. It doesn't have its added gable roof anymore.
And I'm just checking on West Haven. It's taking me a little longer than I thought.
Thank you, Beth.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Beth, it does appear to be listed.
Thank you, Jeff. I don't know why I couldn't
On
get
the
it
study
with
list?
a simple.
Is it West Haven 2 words, Joe?
Yes, that might be the
Okay.
problem.
Beth, are you still looking, or have we answered
Oh.
that question?
I think Jeff answered it for us, I believe.
It doesn't need to be held up.
Okay,
I just
thanks.
wanted to make sure it's on somebody's radar.
All right. Any further discussion on the Rocky Mount properties? Yeah, Fred, please go ahead.
Just comment, very nice work by the consultant.
It was.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Not
It
a
was,
question.
and we'll pass that along to him. We've been very pleased too. So I'm glad we can share some praise from the committee too.
Is the Grubbs and Associates video, is that available standalone, or is that only available through viewing I've got some friends in Rocky Mount that might want to look at that and see it. So I want to see if I could pass it on somehow.
I believe this whole meeting is available on YouTube after the fact. And so
Yes.
via that YouTube link, you could pass it
Okay. Okay. And since it comes up first, you can watch it. Okay. I got you. Thank you.
All right, if there's no further discussion, like to entertain a motion from someone, please.
I also move for acceptance
Thank
to
you
the study
so much.
list.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. And we will do the roll call voting because we're virtual today, so I'll go around my screen. Dr. Fitz?
Aye.
Fred Belladin?
Yes.
Noah Reynolds?
Yes.
David Bergstone?
Yes.
Dr. Harper?
Aye.
Dr. Green?
Yes.
And I believe that is it. It passes. I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry. I forgot Joe. I apologize.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that motion passes. Then we are now on to the Western Region, Graham County Survey. Beth, do you have a few remarks before?
Yes, I just wanted to quickly say that this has been an internal project for our office. We are so pleased that two of our survey specialists, Dr. Mike Land Williams and Audrey Thomas, could work on this project. They did the majority of the field work in 2025 and early this year. And unfortunately, this will be the last time that you see Audrey present as a survey specialist, but we're very pleased to let you know that she's continuing on with our office in a new position in the restoration branch. So we haven't lost Audrey, but you've seen her present, by my count, 4 really good survey presentations over the last 5 years. And so she'll be dearly missed in our branch, but we're so glad she's staying with the wider agency. And of course, we're so appreciative to have Dr. Mike Land Williams also working on this project because she is, nationwide a noted expert in Western North Carolina architecture, particularly of the vernacular variety. So I will let them take it away. But first, Sean Patch, I'd like to ask if would you prefer for them to go straight through the presentation with all voting at the end, or would you like them to pause after each resource type for any questions and discussion among the committee?
Because there are a number of properties, let's start with taking them by property type and just see if there's any discussion so that we don't lose comments. And then if we need to pivot, we can do that.
Okay, thank you very much. And Audrey, we'll turn it over to you if you're manning the computer.
And all right. Can you see the PowerPoint? Does that look good?
Yes.
Okay.
You're not in presentation mode, but we can't see it.
Oh, how do I stop that?
Swap your screen. See at the top it says display settings.
Settings.
And then swap and see if that does it.
Does that look right?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right. Yes. So as Beth mentioned, we're presenting for the Graham County Comprehensive Survey today. All right, so Graham County is located in far western North Carolina on the border with Tennessee. Originally, the land was home to the Cherokee, and white settlers began moving into the area in the 1830s. In 1838, Cherokee removal was initiated, and Fort Montgomery was established as a collection point for the Cherokee people. The removal also brought the first wagon road into the area to become Graham County. During this period, the land was part of Cherokee County. In 1872, Graham was formed from its northeastern section. Robbinsville, near Fort Montgomery, was chosen as the county seat. Graham County is heavily forested, and those resources attracted heavy logging interest beginning with river drives in the 1880s, transitioning to railroad transportation and then to logging trucks. The natural beauty and landscape of the region also made tourism a significant economic force. Graham County boasts the Nantahala National Forest, the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest, multiple lakes created by the TVA, and a portion of the Appalachian Trail. The tourism industry is certainly reflected in the buildings we see in the county: lodges, motels, vacation rentals, and second homes, and more recently, RV parks and glamping sites. Agriculture has also played an important role in Graham, and we'll discuss that a little more in depth later. Today, there are 3 incorporated towns in Graham County: Robbinsville, Fontana Dam, and Lake Santilla. Over 60% of the county's land is within the Nantahala National Forest. Prior to this comprehensive survey, Graham County had about 360 resources surveyed. Most of these were generated from a 1970s survey, a late 1990s survey conducted by Michael Ann, a recent survey of Robbinsville, or through the environmental review process. And as you can see on this map, many of our surveyed points are located along major roadways due to that environmental review, where road construction is being done. For our survey, we only resurveyed properties from the early survey work that had not been updated in the past 5 to 6 years. Likewise, we did not survey Robbinsville due to its recent survey. We surveyed an additional 112 resources. Of those newly surveyed resources, we found a significant number of boxed houses and thought we'd take a quick moment to discuss these. So as opposed to log or frame houses, boxed houses are a single wall construction, meaning there's no studs or typical framing. Essentially, there's a single plank that acts as both the exterior and the interior wall. In this photo, you can see that construction, and then it also has battens nailed between the planks, though this is not a universal feature. In Graham, we also saw a number of double boxed houses. This is the same concept, but with 2 boards nailed together, so you have one on the exterior and one on the interior. As one resident described, the walls are nailed together while lying on the ground and then lifted as one unit to become the wall. And while a regular single-boxed house often has a somewhat uniform appearance, we saw a wide variety in the forms that double-boxed construction was used for. And we'll discuss that a little bit further in the presentation as well. In North Carolina, double-boxed construction seems to be fairly unique to Graham County. Boxed houses were popular in areas with cheap and plentiful lumber, which Graham County had an abundance of. While an owner would need to buy the lumber, the house itself could be erected with several members of the community, continuing the tradition of cooperative building. On the other hand, a frame house would often require hiring for both materials and labor. So in the rural areas of the county, there are 6 properties listed in the National Register. The first, listed in 1984, was the Charles Nodin George House. It was a circa 1853 single-pen log house listed for its architecture. However, it was unfortunately moved to South Carolina, and it's unclear if it remains extant. 3 of the nominations are for the 3 hydroelectric resources in Graham County. The Chiowa, finished in 1919, and Santilla, finished in 1928, were both listed in 2004 for their significance with military, industry, architecture, and engineering. Fontana Dam was completed in 1944 and listed in 2017 for its significance in architecture, engineering, industry, military history, recreation, and social history. Tourism also played a significant role in Graham County's history, and the 2 other rural nominations are for lodges. Topoka Lodge, developed in the 1930s, was initially built to house Topoka employees for the hydroelectric project, as well as tourists. The district has a main lodge, guest cottages, a theater, a guardhouse, as well as other resources. The 1940s Snowbird Lodge was designed by Asheville architect Ronald Green and used local materials and craftsmanship, capitalizing on the views of the Snowbird Mountains and drawing tourists for the national forests and parks. Both properties were listed for their architecture and their association with entertainment and recreation in the region. And while we didn't survey Robbinsville, the town did recently receive a downtown National Register district, seen here with a few examples of the buildings and their 1940s courthouse, which is also individually listed. There are currently 9 study list properties in rural Graham. Several of them are log resources seen here, like the circa 1875 Jesse Gunter house, the circa 1925 style house, and a cantilevered barn, and that is still extant, but it has been enclosed. There's one Y-shaped house on the study list, and that's the John Holloway house. During the 1970s, a handful of houses with this configuration were documented. Unfortunately, they've all been demolished, including this house. There's also several study listed properties in the small unincorporated community of Stokoa, the 1918 Stone Store, the 1931 school, and the 1933 Stokoa Baptist Church. The school and church have also been determined eligible through the environmental review process. Lastly, there are 2 funerary resources on the study list. The first is Junaluska's grave. Junaluska was a Cherokee leader in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. In 1910, the Daughters of the American Revolution erected a large boulder and plaque at his burial site. The site was later expanded with several more monuments. The 1894 grave shelter is an A-frame building covering the grave of Thomas Jefferson Hooper and his wife, and grave shelters were a significant aspect of Upland South burial practices. There are an additional 24 properties that have been determined eligible, some of which have already been study listed, and then some of which we're going to present today. And as you can see, these are mostly along major roadways. They're marked by the orange dots and whatnot on the map. And then the 2 large orange districts that you see are the Trail of Tears and the Appalachian Trail. And here's just a sampling of properties that have been DOE'd. So next, we are going to move into the study list candidates, starting with houses. And we've organized these by construction type rather than date. So we're going to start with log, move to boxed, and then frame. So I'm going to hand it over to Michael Ann.
Our first property is the Campbell Colvard House, which is likely the oldest extant house in Graham County. The house was probably built by Baxter Campbell, who lived from 1817 to 1898, who was one of the early white settlers in what would become Graham County. Campbell was born in Carter Cove, Tennessee, lived in Cades Cove for a period, and arrived in Graham, then Cherokee County, in the 1850s. He would have built the house shortly after his arrival. This is the house in 1979. It's constructed of poplar logs. As you can see, it has a shake and tin roof, half dovetail hewn logs, and a stone chimney. The shed roof porch would have been an addition, and a window was also cut into the facade at some point. It looks very similar to the Charles Snowden George house, which was the National Register property listed that was moved to South Carolina. This is the house today. It has lost its porch, which had been an addition. It maintains the stone chimney and the general form. The survey mentioned a rear shed addition, though it is unclear if that remains. The house was inaccessible during the project, so we don't have interiors. However, it appears to be largely intact and would not have any elaborate finishes on the interior. This property appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. Next is the George Campbell House. It's located at the end of Ledbetter Road in Tallulah. It was built circa 1866 by Jefferson George, who was the son of Charles Snowden George, who constructed the moved National Register house. In 1886, this house was purchased by Buck Campbell, who was the son of Baxter Campbell, who likely built the previous log house we looked at. Buck Campbell's second wife, Mary Head Campbell, lived in this cabin until her death in 1964. So she was a Confederate or Civil War veteran's wife, lived to the 60s. Here's some older photos of the house and outbuildings. Here is the circa 1866 log house with the stone foundation. This is the side and rear, and I think one thing notable is the foundation of the house, which is very much like the Charles Snowden George foundation rather than simple stone piers. Here's the cinder block flue. The property includes a collapsed log smokehouse near the house and a WPA-built outhouse. There's a second collapsed log barn west of the house and along Ledbetter Road, as well as stone wall that you can see going along the edge of the property. This property appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. Last, we have the Stewart cabin. Arch Stewart obtained a land grant and along with his wife and 10 children moved to the area in 1879. He built a log house, however, it was flooded in 1895. He salvaged half the house and moved it a half a mile east to this location and used it to build this current house. The property was sold to Gannett Lumber Company in 1922. After that, Tom Patton occupied the property and is now owned by the U.S. Forest Service. The property is remote and it's located within the National Forest. Here is the front and the large stone chimney. There's the front facade and the rear showing the half dovetail notching. And there is a rear spring house that's somewhat later. This is a photo from the 1970s. The interior is currently closed to the public, but a 1979 description details a small, narrow stairway leading from the lower one room to a single upstairs bedroom and an old fireplace and mantel constructed from field and river rock. This property appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. Next is the Wilson-Quilliams house, located near the small community of Chiowa. This photo shows the building in 1997 when I surveyed it. As you can see, the building is half log and half boxed and is significant for its portrayal of these two important building traditions. The log portion is 2.5-story, half dovetail single pen house built by John Wilson, likely in the late 19th century. It is built of hand-hewn yellow poplar. The logs were split by wedges and were so large a builder could get 2 or 3 timbers out of one log. The sills are made of locust. The locust sills extend beyond the house, perhaps suggesting that addition was planned all along. The box portion was built by John Quilliams, who married Wilson's daughter. It features chestnut and yellow poplar. This is the house today. There's been very few changes since the 90s. It still retains its stone chimney. There is an enclosed rear shed addition. We do not have interiors for this property. However, it still appears to be eligible for listing under criterion C for architecture. Next is the Orr Phillips house, built circa 1889, probably by Davy Orr. It represents distinct characteristics in its form and construction in Graham County. This house is 1.5 stories with a single gable and chimney. This is a popular form seen in Graham County and seems to be what most people built instead of building 2-story I-house form. This is also our first example of a double boxed house. It has been sided with German siding, which was likely a fairly early addition applied at the time that the rear shed a kitchen addition. The house also has a shed porch around 2 sides, which was probably added later. A tongue and groove porch ceiling and has a rock and log foundation. Also around the door, you can see the vertical planks from the original siding. We don't currently have interiors, and the owner indicated they did not believe it was safe to enter at this time. However, the owner provided an oral description of the floor plan seen here. It's a fairly simple layout of 2 rooms on the first level. The half story is divided into bedrooms. We also know that they used wide chestnut plank siding on the interior. It appears to be eligible, for listing under criterion C for architecture. Next is the Jesse Williams house, located near the small community of Chiowa. This is another double boxed house believed to have been built by Jesse Williams in the 1890s. This house has been renovated but retains much of its original materials. It has a saddlebag plan and interior stone chimney slightly off center. It exhibits battens on the exterior, which are sometimes found on boxed houses. It also features a front porch and a stacked stone foundation. The interior appears to have its original mantels, as well as a boxed-in staircase. Half of the upstairs has been finished. Here you can clearly see the double box construction. So you have both exterior vertical boards as well as interior vertical boards that are nailed onto the exterior ones without anything between it except sometimes some form of cardboard or paper. A log corn crib with rough V-notching was part of the original property, but wasn't sold when the property was divided. Here's a few more pictures of the V-notching and the stone foundation. The house appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. The Crisp Shook House was built circa 1930. The longtime owner was Helen Crisp Shook, who bought the house from her brother Boyd Crisp in 1947. This is the only documented bungalow in Graham County of double box construction. The house does not appear to be a boxed house from the external view. We would not have been able to identify it without the owner's knowledge of the construction method. This house helps illustrate the variety of house forms that were built using double box construction. It appears that double boxing was often used for larger and or more stylish houses as opposed to the single boxed houses. The house has a front porch with a low hipped roof and a riverstone foundation. Wormy chestnut was used to clad the interior walls. Later rear and side additions and a carport have been added. The property also features extensive landscaping and retaining walls. In 1965, Helen Shook built a fish pond and sold fish here. The property appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. Next is another boxed house, which was DOE'd in 2019. We did not have access to the property, so we were using documentation from the ER report, which resulted in its determination of eligibility. The house was built circa 1930. However, it was moved in the early 1940s by Mr. Green and Marty Jenkins as a result of the construction of the nearby Fontana Dam. Though moved, it is primarily significant for its architecture. It may also be significant as an example of a popular house type, which was spared from the flooding for Fontana Lake because of that move. The vertical wood plank exterior is typical of a boxed house. The second level roof system and porch appear to be later and were likely added when it was moved. The interior was visible through the windows, and its plan appears to consist of 4 rooms divided by wood plank partition walls. The DOA boundary did not include this nearby barn, but it could be associated. It is on the same parcel and is a rare example of a purpose-built tobacco barn in Graham County. While tobacco was the primary crop grown, many simply reused other barns for tobacco use. This is one of only 2 barns surveyed that has the ventilated top and was used for burley tobacco. Next is the Sam and Mattie Lale house, built circa 1942. This is another boxed house with a double pen plan and a single concrete block chimney. It has vertical boards with no battens on the exterior. We do not have interiors, though the current owner, the grandson of Sam and Mattie Lale, indicated that he wants to keep everything exactly as they had it. It appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. To round out the log and boxed houses, we have 2 houses occupied or built by Earl and Muriel Buchanan on Greens Creek. The family had a 200-acre farm raising tobacco and dairy cows. you can see the log house and box house separated by the creek. And here is the log house in front and the boxed house behind. Moving from another log house nearby, the couple purchased or built this log house in 1937. It is a late example of a traditional log cabin with unhewn saddle-notched logs and a double pen plan. The cinder block flue is on the rear of the log portion. A rear wing extends off the back of the house. This is where the chimney once stood on the gable end. The Buchanans cooked on a wood fire. And here are a few more details of the log house. In the mid-1940s, the Buchanans left their log house across the creek and built this new 1.5-story front gable boxed house with 5 bedrooms and 2 front doors. It's unusually large for its type. This is moving around the side of the house where you can see the vertical plank. And the rear with a small covered porch. You can also see the log house in the background. The opposite side of the house does have this large replacement window. There's an entry room on the west end of the house and a hall behind. The interior of the house had tongue and groove paneling on the walls, which has since been removed. The house was heated by a coal stove in the kitchen. A roof leak necessitated the removal of the chimney at the roof. The floor is built of oak and there are 2 bedrooms downstairs. The central staircase leads to the 2nd floor. And there's a front bedroom and hall. This is a storage room under the roof where the construction of the planks can be seen. We think there's some possibility that this is actually a double boxed house. The owner, who was the grandson of the builders, didn't identify it as such. But looking at the way the boards you can see attached under the eaves gives us some reason to think that it may be double box, as well as the size, because you usually do not see the single wall boxed houses quite this large. In the 1960s, the couple again built a new house, which has since been torn down. These 2 houses together show important building types for Graham County, a late example of log construction in the 1930s and a mid-1940s 1.5-story boxed house used by the same family in a relatively short time. Both houses were occupied until the mid-1970s by members of the family and are now vacant. They appear to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. At this point, these are our log and boxed houses. Are there questions about these properties?
I had one question comment. How many of these houses had exterior and especially interior wormy chestnut paneling? I think there was one,
A whole lot of them. In fact, most of them.
Yeah, that's just, if for historic information, that was a grand old tree that was twice as high as any of the other trees in the forest, and it died out in the 30s because of a blight. And in Western North Carolina, they were cut down and used extensively for building materials. They're like locust posts. They last a really long time. So a lot of barns were sided in wormy chestnut, and the interior's got a golden finish on it. And any buildings that have that are rare, a rarity just by virtue of still having that wood, especially if it's an interior paneling, because it's been gone for almost 100 years now.
I think we'll see another one, at least one more in the farms section. It is kind of represents a threat to the houses, though, because people want to go in and tear out the chestnut. And I know the owner of one of the boxed houses that we'll see later was concerned because people really wanted to strip the house of its wood. Okay, I'm going to pass it.
Question.
Yes.
May I ask for a clarification of this box construction?
Yeah.
I may know something that's maybe different and also uses that term. But in this box construction, do you have a number of studs between the corner post?
No, none at all.
Okay. And then how are windows framed? Are they framed only with the horizontals and then vertical within that vertical framing?
I think typically the wall was put out and then the window was simply cut out of the logs.
Of the siding, you mean?
Yeah, well, a lot of them don't have siding, so it's basically on a single wall. It's just those.
I'm talking about box construction. So
yeah, in the vertical plank.
you just cut. How do you frame you must have some sort of frame to put the window sash in, don't you?
Actually, not really, and that's one way that some people who get box houses realize that they have a single wall construction is they go to alter the windows, and there's no depth there at all. It's just the width of the plank.
Okay. What I'm familiar with, and this is another part of the country, but from West Texas through New Mexico and down into Mexico also, a lot of housing that was done, and it's the same sort of idea where you have corner post, you have usually horizontal boards that frame up where you put a sash in, and for framing I'm talking about now, but the vertical plank boards, you usually do not have a batten. In fact, you don't have a batten. It's always just a plank board. They're vertical, and that's what forms the framing, essentially the perimeter of the building. But it was real typical for migrant workers, farm buildings. When the Chinese laborers came in for the railroads across New Mexico and into Mexico and so forth, that was very typical housing over there. And it is called box construction. I don't recall ever hearing it called double box though, but
the double box is interesting. There are examples in Kentucky, which I had heard of when I lived in Kentucky, and I've been corresponding with a architecture surveyor who's worked particularly on Pine Mountain Settlement School, has a bunch of double box. For all the work I've done in North Carolina, I have never heard of or seen double box before. And then we get to Graham County and people are telling us about it all the time. So it's been a really interesting experience. In fact, that bungalow was the first one. And we were leaving and I just assumed it was a frame house. And she said, "Oh, this house is double boxed, if you know what that means." And that kind of began our whole adventure in finding that a whole lot of the boxed houses in Graham County are actually double boxed.
Yeah. And one other question, in the 1.5 story or the 2 story, is the framing then balloon framing going all the way from the bottom plate to the top plate at the roof?
No, it's usually the boards are going single board going all the way up.
Yeah, but so the framing is balloon framing then. So it goes all the way from the bottom plate, first floor, all the way up to wherever the second level. How about that?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of the dates of that sort of construction?
The earliest ones that we found in Western North Carolina about 1880s.
Yeah.
Some people have presumed it was brought in for the timber industry. I'm not totally convinced of that because in, for example, Graham County, you start seeing these houses, these buildings used for rural domestic structures prior to the advent of the big timber camps. So though they were used extensively in timber camps as well as in coal camps in Kentucky and elsewhere in Appalachia.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or should we move on to frame?
Welcome to move on, please.
All right. All right. So we're going to move on to the frame houses. So the first up is the John A. Cody House, which was built around 1890. John A. Cody was born in Tennessee in 1840 and moved to the area by 1860. After the Civil War, he worked as a farmer. He died in 1923, passing his property to his children. Three of them remained in the house nearly their entire lives, and it still remains in the family. The property was DOE'd in 2019, and we're using that previous documentation. We did field check the property, and it appears to be in similar condition. The ER report notes that the property still has a remaining portion of the old highway roadbed, the remains of a former orchard, and a root cellar. So this house is a rare example of a full 2-story house in rural Graham County. The ER report suggests the house may have begun as a one-story, two-room structure on the north end, which would be over here, with an interior brick chimney. And then shortly after its construction, circa 1900, the building was expanded, reaching this current configuration with an addition to the south over here, and then the addition of the second story. The room in the center would have then been converted to a broad center hall, and this explanation may explain the somewhat atypical form of the house. The house has weatherboard siding, and most windows are 2/2 wood sash. The interior has a center hall and wood flooring throughout the first story. Wallpaper covers horizontal wallboards throughout most of the house. And here are some examples of the mantles. And then a dining room with a fireplace and a kitchen are located in the rear L. This house appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. The Colvard House is a distinctive two-story craftsman-style house less than a mile from Robbinsville. While the structure was originally constructed circa 1900 by Joseph J. Colvard, or one of his sons, it received a substantial renovation in the 1930s, which is significant in its own right. The property remained in the hands of the Colvard family descendants until 2009. The property was DOE'd in 2019, and again, we're using that previous documentation for this. The Colvard House is 2 stories and is clad with plain weatherboard siding. It has an exterior brick chimney, gable end brackets, and a front porch composed of native stone with grapevine mortar joints and a beadboard porch ceiling. Windows include 4/1 wood sash, as well as 4/4 and 4/2 several fixed sash windows. The interior of the Colvard House has a center hall. Much of the early 20th century materials remain in place, including the flooring, beadboard walls and ceilings, and paneled doors. Photos from the second story also show much of the original material intact. The Colvard House appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture, recognizing that the 1930s alterations would need to be demonstrated to be significant. Next is the Pink and Bertie Sawyer House, which was constructed circa 1932 near Tuskegee. The property consists of the main house, a barn, and a store building. The house is framed with weatherboard siding, clipped gables, brackets, and its original windows. It's unusual for the area in that it is a full 2 rooms deep. And during its construction, it was noted in the newspaper as a modern 12-room dwelling. And while we were unable to gain access to the interior, it is a rental property with photos online. So we included some of those where you can see a stone chimney and ceiling materials. Here's another photo of the downstairs interior. And some examples of the bedrooms, the floor, wall, ceiling materials, and a paneled door. And then on the property, there's this concrete block store building on the corner. And we weren't able to find out much about its history, but there has been a building on the site since at least the mid-1930s. So with a little more research in the future, the history of this building may be able to be determined. And this property appears eligible for criterion C for architecture. And those are all the frame houses, if anyone has any questions before we move on to farms. Okay.
Before we begin discussing the proposed farms, we want to provide a quick overview of agricultural context for Graham County. The county has less land suitable for agriculture than any other Western North Carolina counties. Most farms were small scale with only a few outbuildings. By 1970, the average size of a farm was 50 acres with only 4.5 acres devoted to row crops. Perhaps because of there was relatively little pressure from the development of commercial agriculture, the landscape changed less. Log building persisted well into the 20th century and was favored by many small-time farmers who adapted and extended traditional plans. Despite tobacco being the main cash crop, many simply raised the height of their barns or added frame additions rather than building a custom tobacco barn. Additionally, most farms do not have many specialized agricultural buildings. The first farm on our list is the Randolph Stewart Farm, which was DOE'd in 2019. Here's a map of the property showing the house at the bottom and the various outbuildings and a field to the rear. According to local historian and property owner Jimmy Calhoun, Monroe Moore built the 1.5-story side gable house around 1890. One of the earliest members of the Randolph family acquired the property, one of the earliest members of the Randolph family to acquire the property in Graham County was Jacob C. Randolph in 1909, and the AR report theorized that he was actually the house builder. Jacob Randolph married Jane Green and was a lifelong farmer. Doc Davis Stewart purchased the property from Fred and Rosa Randolph in 1920 and added the rear L and the front porch. The property is still in the family. There are 2 single-leaf doors in the north and south bays. The windows have 4/4 wood sashes, which is the most prevalent type throughout the building. There are a number of outbuildings on the property, including 3 sheds and 2 barns. This is the largest gambrel roof barn. Diagonal siding is a common feature in Graham County on barns, though the gambrel roof is much less common in Graham County, where the gable roof appeared to be favored. And this barn appears to have been used for curing tobacco. The property is eligible under criterion A for agriculture. Next is the Huskisson Farm, which encompasses 2 houses and an array of outbuildings. It is illustrative of multiple generations of a family farm during the 20th century. Here is a map of the property. We will start with the 1899 log house, then the 1939 boxed house, then west to east on the outbuildings from corn mill to the upper barn. George and Julia Huskisson purchased this house in 1921. It had been built by John Colvard around 1899. And it may not look like it now, but it is a log house underneath all that. The house was extensively remodeled. It was originally 2 rooms with an exterior and chimney, later covered with weatherboarding. And then in the 1890s, it was covered with a stone veneer of local granite. Boxed house was built in 1939 by George Huskisson. It was made of chestnut boards with a foundation of locust logs on stone. It has a chimney and a rear shed addition, which has been closed. Built as a starter house for George's sons. In the mid-20th century, the boxed house did not have electricity or plumbing. We were able to walk through the property with a woman who grew up here, and she said in the 1950s, they didn't have either of these things. George Huskisson ran a corn mill across the road from his house, which is seen in front, and the building behind is corn crib. Both buildings are of log. First is the corn crib, and the other 2 are of the mill. Farming was still done by mules through the mid-20th century. They were stabled in the old barn, pictured here. This is the tobacco barn, which was central to farming in the county. And the upper barn, which housed cattle and was used to store hay. The Huskisson farm appears to be eligible under criterion A for agriculture, showing the transformations of a mountain farm by a single family during the 20th century. Next is the Cabe Farm, located in the Sawyers Creek area. The current owner, Jeffrey Cabe, believes that the house was built by his grandfather, Dillard Cabe, around 1920. Across the road from the house was the Brock Post Office, later called Sawyers Creek, and Dr. Brock's medical office. Dillard's son, Jack, farmed cattle, vegetables, and tobacco, and later built a ranch house up on the hill from the farm complex. Here is a view of the house and the outbuildings. This is a photo from the 1997 survey, and at that time, the house was already being used for agricultural storage. And here's the house today. It's a double pen boxed house. The chimney was removed prior to 1997 by somebody from Stokoe and was used to build the rock wall that's around the Stokoe School. The house has a stacked stone foundation and the main sills are hand-hewn. The owner has replaced some sills in an ongoing stabilization effort. These photos show the porch and interior space. The timber for the hardwood floors inside originally came from the mill at Hazel Creek. The chestnut mantles have been removed by the owner due to fear of vandalism, though he retains them. Here's some other examples of the interior. The second photo is the rear shed addition, which was at one point there was a wall separating a bedroom from the kitchen. Behind the house are a tobacco barn and a corn crib and smokehouse. Many Graham County farms were small with just a few outbuildings, and tobacco was the main cash crop in the mid-20th century. The complex conveys a typical and intact small-scale farming operation for Graham County and is eligible for under Criterion A for agriculture. The Robert and Minnie Wiggins Farm is a particularly well-preserved farm complex dating from the 1920s along Burt's Creek. Robert Wiggins and Minnie Holloway married in 1919 and built the house in 1920. The property is still in the family. This is a quick overview of the house and outbuildings in relationship to each other. We'll start at the house and work west. This is a view of the farm from the roadway. The house is a relatively large 1.5-story saddlebag plan with a stone central chimney and a pressed metal roof. It has a river stone foundation under the original part of the house. A side extension with exposed rafters is likely the kitchen addition. The rear of the house has been extended through, though the fieldstone foundation suggests that it was a rear porch that was later enclosed. And a simple carport has been added to the side. The vertical plank smokehouse sits behind the house, and a log crib is in ruin south of the house. The crib is likely a late construction as the corners are minimally notched and nailed together. This is a view from the house looking west toward the other outbuildings and fields. There are 2 intact log structures which are in good condition, a V-notched log crib with a frame addition and a large 2-story log barn. Across the field is a large transverse crib frame barn. The property appears to be eligible under Criterion A for agriculture. This is the Garfield Carringer Farm. It's a large farm complex dating from the mid-20th century near the Stokoe community. Stokoe had some of the most productive farmland in the county and became one of the most prosperous of the agricultural communities. The Carringers grew and created tobacco until they stopped production relatively recently in 2015. Here's a map of the complex. The second aerial is south of the main complex. We'll start at the house and work south along the creek to the 1970 barn, then the resources in the middle. The 1.5-story farm frame house was built in the 1950s by Garfield Carringer. It had an exterior and chimney and a front porch with gabled dormers over the porch. The house was extended on both sides by Carringer's sons in the 1970s. This is moving around the east side of the house and looking north toward the field. The circa 1950 smokehouse sits directly behind the house. The oldest barn, a transverse crib barn, was built in the 1950s and sits just east of the house. This is moving south around the barn. And this is a chicken coop. A huge 3-story frame barn with diagonal siding and a gambrel roof was added up the hill in the 1970s. The bottom of the barn housed cattle, and the rest was used to hang tobacco. The barn is built into the bank, providing a drive entrance to the second floor. The barns and several other outbuildings, including the chicken house and pig pen, are painted red with white trim. It's unusual to see painted farm buildings in far western North Carolina. And here's the small pig pen. There's a later manufactured home with a few sheds, and beyond that is a stone spring house. Sited above the farm along Dry Creek Road sits the family cemetery. Circa 1980s outbuilding is further south. In addition to the variety of outbuildings, the farm features an orchard, footbridge, fields, and vegetable plots. It's one of the most complete and striking farm complexes in Graham County and is eligible under Criterion A for agriculture. That's all our farm proposals are the questions.
I have a question. On that last one, the Garfield Carringer barn, did you say that there is a way to get up to drive up to the second floor?
Yeah, it's building into a bank, so it's
like a bank barn.
It is a bank barn, though it's built into from the gable end rather than the Pennsylvania German that would be the non-gable end. And there was another, at least one or two more that we've seen, and we saw several in Clay County too that were utilized the bank. It's actually kind of surprising there aren't more bank barns in the mountains because it makes a lot of sense in terms of topography.
Do you know of other parts of the state that we have diagonal siding that's typical like that for barn structures?
I've seen it elsewhere in Western North Carolina. That's the only place I've done survey. I don't know whether Audrey or Beth can comment on that.
Yeah, I've done most of my survey in the West as well, I guess, so I'm not sure. Yeah. But if Beth has any input, or Sarah.
I don't think of it as an Eastern North Carolina thing, and I'll invite Sarah to chime in too, but I think it is primarily a far Western thing because we're also working in Polk County, which is one of our counties that transitions from the foothills into the true mountains, and we're not seeing it there, although we are seeing a couple of bank barns that do have that eave bank rather than the gable end bank that this barn has.
Well, the Biltmore House horse barn has that road that leads up to on the gable end too. It leads up to the second level, but I can't think of others in the state that I know of, but not that I wouldn't necessarily know very much about the broad survey.
I'm familiar with it mostly. The diagonal siding is a Western North Carolina thing. Watauga County comes to mind right off. And
Just
in
curious.
terms of a bank barn, yeah, you see it in the West, and that's I can't think of many, or I can't think of any examples right off in the Piedmont, but
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions before we move on to commercial? All right. So we only have one commercial property that we're proposing, and that is the Colvard Motor Company. And we're proposing it along with the Frank and Leonora Colvard House, which sits across the road. These are less than a mile from Robbinsville. And these two properties were built by Frank and Leonora Colvard around 1930 with native stone. They owned and operated the motor company from the 1930s to the 1960s, and both of these properties were DOE'd in 2019. And again, we field checked them, but we're using mostly documentation from that ER report. So in the 1930s, full service service stations were becoming popular nationally, offering gas, garage bays for repair, and automobile showrooms. Frank Colvard built this station circa 1930, opening along the newly built US 129, which was the county's first hard surface highway, and an ideal location to offer gasoline and repairs to passing motorists. The business was expanded with two additional repair bays built on the south side of the building around 1950. Frank Colvard ran an independent full-service station with a DeSoto automobile showroom, repair garage, and Esso branded gas station opposite from his home on Tallulah Road. So here's the side and the rear. Just some of the details of the building. This is an interior shot of the office space. The floors, walls, and ceilings of the storefront section are completely sheathed in modern materials. But here's an interior of the garage. This section is one large interior space with concrete floors and walls and exposed steel beams. Few, if any, pre-World War II service stations are extant outside of Robbinsville and Graham County. So just across the road sits the Frank and Leonora Colvard House, which is a craftsman-style bungalow built around the same time as the service station. Like the service station, the house has a stone exterior with grapevine mortar joints. It also has 2 stone chimneys, 8/1 wood windows, exposed rafters, and a deep porch evocative of the craftsman influence. Exterior alterations are limited to the replacement of the front door and the application of vertical siding in the gables. The site also has a 2-story shingled garage apartment and a flat-roofed stucco-covered concrete block shed. And then set behind the house is a large gambrel roof barn. And here's just a circa 1950 photo identifying it as Frank Colvard's barn as well. So together, these 2 buildings appear eligible under Criterion A for commerce and possibly Criterion C for architecture. We also only have 1 church and 1 cemetery, so I'll go ahead and do those, and we can talk about all of them after. So the first is the Old Mother Church Cemetery, which is located right on the outskirts of Robbinsville. So here you can see a map. So it's right outside the town limits. It was formally established in 1875 at the same time as the church's construction, though burials date back as early as 1856. The cemetery is 27 acres and contains more than 2,000 burials. The Old Mother Church sits right in the middle of the cemetery between the old section and the new section. It was heavily renovated in 1972, so we don't think that the church itself is a good candidate for a study list individually. So here's the cemetery. This is the north end, which holds the oldest graves, with marked graves dating roughly from 1856 to the 1920s. The cemetery contains native stone and concrete walls along roads and has burial plot enclosures. This is an overview shot from the south end. The new section is at the south end of the cemetery and generally contains graves from the 1940s through the present. And here are just some examples of early grave markers for burials from the 19th century. The cemetery contains unmarked graves, uncut fieldstone markers, and hand-carved stones. These are from the early 20th century. One distinctive grave marker is the tall marble Woodman of the World monument, which is the first one on this slide. And here's a small sampling for stones from the mid-20th century, roughly the 40s through the 60s. So the cemetery is significant both for its age and as a place of local cultural importance. It's by far the largest cemetery in the county and sits just outside Robbinsville, the county seat. Its marked graves date to 1856, prior to the county's founding, and unmarked graves are thought to date to the 1840s, shortly after the Cherokee removal. The hilltop location has served as a meeting location for both Methodists and Baptists and was the site of early education efforts, as well as the first term of the Superior Court. It is eligible under Criterion A for exploration settlement and social history. And then our only church is the Sweetwater Baptist Church, which is located in the small community of Chiowa. The congregation was organized in the 1880s and built 2 church buildings near the current site before completing this one in 1949. So here are some of the photos from 1997, and here it is today. It hasn't changed much since then. The current stone church was built under the direction of Reverend Harvey Phillips. In 1948, the congregation obtained the stone from a gymnasium that was being demolished at Fontana Dam. A carpentry class composed of World War II veterans did much of the construction. The cornerstone was laid in 1949, and the church was dedicated in 1952. Here are the rear and sides. Again, not much has changed since that previous documentation, aside from the addition of the lift at the rear. This is a baptismal font in the rear of the property. And we weren't able to access the interior during our survey, but I did find this photo online that shows paneled walls, carpet, and a mural on the back wall. Just to show a few comparison properties, this is the Stone Stokoa Baptist Church, which was built in 1933, and it was study listed in 1999. And then the Hosanna Church in Robbinsville, which was built around 1930, which has not been study listed. And these are just some of the other churches that we were seeing around rural Graham County to give you kind of an idea of why we thought Sweetwater Baptist Church might kind of rise to the top of being eligible for National Register listing. Sweetwater Baptist appears to have high significance and integrity within rural Graham County and appears to be eligible under criterion C for architecture. Any questions on the commercial or religious properties?
I had a question about, is Old Mother Church a graveyard or a cemetery? Is it not managed and operated by the church?
Oh,
So
do you know
registered,
if
isn't it?
it's,
Or they're privately operated? There's a distinction between graveyards and cemeteries.
right?
I can check the property records really
Thank you,
quickly.
Beth.
Because I say it's the graveyard if it's a religious burial ground versus a cemetery, which is not religious. It's not privately or municipally operated.
It's such a large cemetery that it seems unlikely to me that the church would be able to support it without,
Yeah,
but let me check that.
that was one that was from the ER report. So
Okay,
I unfortunately didn't look.
just be curious
Mhm.
which way to categorize it. Since you identify it as part of the church, but it will technically be a graveyard.
It looks like, according to the Graham County tax assessor, it looks like part of the larger cemetery is on a parcel owned by the church.
Okay.
And then a larger portion of it appears to be owned by Graham County.
That's some of both, maybe. Parts of the church graveyard and parts of municipal cemetery. Okay.
The burials do predate Old Mother Church. Is that correct, Michaelina and Audrey?
I believe there was a church there early on, but it was like a Methodist church first, and then the Baptist church came after. And I think Old Mother was 1870s is when that specific church.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is the oldest church building in the county, even though it has been changed quite a bit. But I think the site of that goes back to soon after the Cherokee removal, they started using that site, the Methodist originally.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to bridges and fire towers. So first we'll do fire towers. Both Joanna Bald and, do you know how to pronounce it? Buchacha Bald fire towers were constructed in 1952, purchased from the International Derrick and Equipment Company. The towers are very similar with only slight variation. These were both DOE'd in 2005, so we're using the documentation from that ER report supplemented with some online, more recent documentation. And we have reached out to the Forest Service for updated information, but they have not gotten back yet. This is the Joanna Bald Lookout Tower. It's a 4-sided steel truss frame with bolted connections based on a standard design. The lookout houses also follow a standard regional design. They are square wood frame structures with pyramidal roofs and 4 windows per side, and they are surrounded by a catwalk with access through a hinged hatch. And these are some more recent photographs of the tower. This is the next one. It's almost identical to the Joanna Bald Tower, but the cab was inaccessible in 2005. And there's an updated photo from 2019. So each tower played an important role in the Forest Service's effort to detect and control fire on federal land and preserve the natural resources and economic value of the forests. They were the primary method of fire detection through the 1960s and are eligible under criterion A under conservation. And the next one is the Little Tennessee River Bridge, which was DOE'd in 2003. This is the bridge seen within the Fontana Hydroelectric Project, National Register Historic District. The TVA built this steel girder and floor beam bridge in 1945 to provide access to the road below the Fontana Dam. With steel in high demand during World War II, the bridge utilized steel beams salvaged from construction trestles that had been used during the dam's construction. According to the Historic Structures Survey report by Liechtenstein Consulting Engineers in 2003, the bridge is the longest and most impressive of the bridges built by the TVA in association with water control projects in Western North Carolina from the mid-1930s to the 1950s. It's also the earliest bridge in the state with a continuous cantilever design with pin and hanger connections. The design allows for a longer, clear span with a shallower beam, allowing this bridge to be built with only 5 spans. The American Institute of Steel Construction presented the structure its 1945 award for Most Beautiful Bridge in its class, based upon simplicity of details that give it a striking appearance. It is eligible under Criterion A for its association with the Fontana Dam project and Criterion C for its design. Any comments on those two before we move on to districts, which is our last section? Right. All right. So we've got two districts that we will present. Our first is the Cheoah Historic District, which is a small agricultural community situated between the town of Robbinsville and the unincorporated community of Stokoe. The district is oriented around the intersection of Beach Creek Road and Ernest Phillips Road. A permanent community of settlers was established in the area by the late 1880s when a frame Baptist church was erected and a school followed after. There was a post office by 1896 as well as a mill. Today, Cheoah contains a collection of buildings dating from circa 1900 to circa 1975. It has the Sweetwater Baptist Church, which we looked at earlier, several houses and agricultural structures. The school, mill, and dam and a large store building were all lost by the 1940s. However, the area still maintains integrity as a small, distinct agricultural community, and it was DOE'd in 2019. The 1936 USGS map shows the school and mill, though they were gone by the 1940s. By the mid-1930s, Cheoah was linked to Robbinsville by a gravel-paved road. In the early 1950s, Sweetwater Road was paved, becoming the county's second hard surface road and realigning the main artery to the north of the community. Due to this, the main transportation network of the community remains intact along Ernest Phillips Road. And here's the district today. So looking at the pictures, we're going to start at the church down here, and then we'll kind of move around and then hit some of these other resources. Here's the view from Sweetwater Road looking towards the church. In 1949, Sweetwater Baptist Church is the community's only surviving institutional building. This is the circa 1900 Shope House looking from the church parking lot. Boyne and Sally Rogers Shope lived here in the 1940s until their deaths. Boyne worked for the TVA and Sally was the postmaster. Moving west, there's a circa 1940 house and a circa 1975 dwelling right near the church. And you have some agricultural structures on the west end of the district. These are taken from Ernest Phillips Road. You can see the gambrel roof barn and church up top, and then the rear of the Shope House below. And then this is looking back towards Sweetwater Road. This is the Floyd Crisp House, which was covered in a stone veneer around the 1930s, but it's reportedly a log structure under the veneer. And then this is a frame barn north of Sweetwater Road. It was associated with the demolished circa 1910 Molt Rice House, which was one of those Y plan houses. And then these buildings are on Ernest Phillips on the far east end of the district. And then one more time, this is kind of the overview of the district. And then the best comparison for Cheoah in rural Graham County is likely Stokoe, which is another agricultural community about 7 miles away. And this community has some great stone buildings that we've seen earlier. These have all been study listed, a church, a store, and a school. And then here's a map of Stokoe, so you can kind of get an idea of the layout. And just as a comparison, a district here would probably be a lot more difficult, largely due to this big infill construction here and some integrity issues with the houses along. So that's why we decided not to propose Stokoe. I thought Cheoah might have better integrity. So the district appears eligible under Criterion A for community planning and development as an example of an organic agricultural development resulting in a collection of agricultural, domestic, and religious buildings.
And our last district of the day is the floating cabins of Lake Fontana. The construction of Fontana Dam occurred from 1942 to 1944, created Fontana Lake, which covers over 10,000 acres and has about 240 miles of shoreline. After the lake's completion, people started building floating cabins to provide recreational access to the lake by at least the 1950s. The early cabins were do-it-yourself construction, often used as fishing shacks. Some included holes in the floors to accommodate fishing. Because they are non-navigable, they have no motors, they are not considered houseboats. This 1984 newspaper article provides a description of one cabin. Quote, JR and I visited the Millsaps family shack, which floats on billets of plastic foam and is guided by cables as it floats up and down with the fluctuating lake level. It has 6 bunks, a large kitchen dining area, and a marine-type chemical toilet. These shacks once floated on logs or oil drums, but the Department of Interior now requires plastic form flotation. Well, there are about 350 cabins on Fontana Lake. We documented the ones along Lower Panther Creek Road. Here you can see the expansion of the use of these floating cabins in that area in particular from 1962 to 1978. And in 1993. Here's the same area today. The floating cabins were originally prohibited in the 1970s. However, there was no enforcement and more continued to be added. Then in 2016, TVA again tried to enforce removal of the cabins due to concerns of safety, sanitation, and water quality. This caused quite a bit of controversy, and President Obama eventually signed legislation preventing the TVA from eliminating the floating cabins. So now there is only a prohibition on new construction on the lake. TVA requires any renovation or rebuilding of a unit to be approved, and the footprint of each cabin cannot be enlarged. Here are some examples from the Lower Panther Creek section of the lake. Further study of Panther Creek area and Fontana Lake may determine if just this area may be eligible for listing or if the boundary should be widened to incorporate more examples elsewhere. These are just some various pictures. And once the lake was drawn down, we were able to see some of them more closely. As you can see, there have been some updated materials, but many still have a hand-built appearance. They're kind of an assemblage of various materials. And these are on the opposite side. These are some examples of floating cabins elsewhere on Fontana, retrieved from Airbnb. So there are a few of them that do operate now as Airbnb structures. As an example of date of construction, this floating cabin is owned by Eric and Laura Sneed. It has been on the same spot since 1968, and the Sneeds purchased and renovated it in 2015. It sits on the site of the town of Judson in Swain County. While the lake provided a good resource for hydroelectric power, flood control, and recreation, ownership of lakefront property was out of the reach for many. Most of the shoreline is public land, and the private land available was prohibitively expensive for most locals who gave the land for the lake's creation. These floating cabins allowed local residents to own homes on the lake, reclaiming a portion of what had been taken in the lake's creation. It appears that the floating cabins are eligible under Criterion A for entertainment recreation. And that's it.
Yeah, thanks. So.
Any questions?
So for the floating cabins, how are that ownership determined then? They just own that little floating platform in the middle of the lake?
And then I guess TVA assigns them a location that but the building itself is owned, but not any land connected to
Right.
it.
Are they considered like boats or something, like registered with the Marine Office or something?
I'm not sure exactly what the registration, they have to be registered. They don't have any means of propulsion, so they're not typically categorized as boats. I don't know whether the term floating cabins was kind of used originally by the TVA in a sort of way to denigrate them. But they are fairly strictly controlled now. But it was quite a controversy. Local people went and testified to Congress about the importance of it. And I think it was, at least originally, a way of, as we've said, for local people to sort of take ownership back of if you're going to create a lake, but this is a way that we can have a piece of it back.
I just think that's so neat. I wasn't aware of that. Like, I want to go stay in one of those. I just think it's the neatest thing. It reminds me of like in Norway, they got some fjords where the sea level goes up and down, 15 feet over, when the tides come in and out, and they've got, boats that lay on the ground and then they come back up. But I've never seen like houses like that. So
Yeah.
very neat.
This is Ramona, and I just wanted to say when we were having our internal review, we did discuss sort of comparisons too, and one that I had thought of, and we found out they are listed. Some of them are listed on the register. Are houseboats in Seattle. If you've ever seen the movie Sleepless in Seattle, Tom Hanks has one of those houses, and anyway, they're kind of a thing out there. So we were thinking how you would strategize around preparing a nomination for these someday, but I think we found some paths forward.
Because they'd be objects, they wouldn't be an actual district, would they?
Well, I think we discussed that too, did we not, Audrey, Michael Ann?
That'd be interesting how to categorize that, yeah.
And some are technically in Graham County, and some are in Swain County. They're pretty well distributed. So, I mean, it'd take a fascinating dissertation or thesis to really dive into the question even more.
Well, we have boats and streetcars and trains on the National Register. I guess we can have some floating houses.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions? I just want to compliment both of you on the excellent presentation and the research. It was very well done, and I've learned a new property type today: floating cabins. I appreciate that. We have a presentation for Graham County properties by my count, and I believe those are all recommended for study listing. Is that correct? Okay. There's no further discussion or questions.
I'd recommend approval.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Joe. And could I ask you guys to stop screen sharing, please, just so I can see all the, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, then we'll do the roll call vote. Fred Belladin,
Yes.
David Bergstone,
Yes.
Dr. Harper,
Aye.
Noah Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Fitz,
Aye.
Joe Opperman,
Yes.
and I will vote yes because we had Dr. Green had to leave, so that motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you again for the excellent presentation. Sarah, is there anything else on the agenda for today?
Nope, you have reached the end of the line for February.
Right, ask for a motion to adjourn. Do you or Ramona have any closing comments? Anything you want to say?
I do not. Just as always, I appreciate everyone's time and attention. Ramona.
I echo that and appreciate everyone's engagement, especially to come back for part 2. Just shows that our staff's extremely busy and we're finding out new things about our state every day, and none of this is possible without you. So thank you.
All right. Well, that concludes our meeting. I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn just to make it formal.
I motion.
Thank you, Dr. Fitz. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. And then we'll do the roll call vote. Fred Belladin,
Yes.
David Bergstone,
Yes.
Dr. Harper,
Aye.
Noah Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Fitz,
Aye.
Joe Opperman,
Yes.
and yes for me. Meeting adjourned. Thanks for joining today, everybody, and for the great presentations and discussion. Good to see everyone.
Good. Thank you.